Adrian? Super empowered digital nomad? Is that what it is?
Super productive.
Oh, sorry, super productive. It's even better than empowered. Thanks for being here. This is quite a location. I think it's fairly stunning. For those who are at our very first Atmosphere just about a year ago, seems like we've upgraded a bit. We've grown quite a bit. I think last time Werner from Amazon and Mark Benioff's heads were basically scraping against the ceiling of the room that we had our meeting in. So glad we're able to make this a little more comfortable and roomy for you all. This is going to be hopefully a great event. We do appreciate that in our audience and amongst us today we have a fairly diverse group, and by that I don't mean gender and race. We probably could use with some more diversity with respect to those criteria, but really in terms of interest and belief in the cloud. There are amongst us certainly the zealots, and I would put most of us up on stage in that category of people who are very bought into the cloud and can't do enough to talk about it. There's those who are very interested and curious, but cautious and have some concerns, the middle roaders, and there's, of course, I'm sure out there, some hardcore cloud skeptics. So wherever you fall in that, on that line, hopefully there'll be something for you today. For the zealots like us, sort of a tent gathering, sort of a revival fest of sorts. Hopefully if you have a lot of questions or doubts, you're going to learn more, you're going to hear more about the cloud and what's happened in the last year and how it's changed. And if you are one of those real skeptics, hopefully we're not going to give you too many more reasons to think we've all gone off our rocker and lost our sensibilities entirely. I'm going to talk a bit about what's happened in the last year, since a lot of you were here last October in London at the inaugural Atmosphere event. I'll talk about what's going on a bit in the industry, what we've been doing, and where we think we're going. Cloud computing, let's just say it continues to be that thing at the top of the list. Gartner says it's the #1 in terms of strategic technologies in 2010. That's not perhaps too surprising, particularly considering what vast swaths of the IT world have been papered with the cloud computing term. There's hardly anything that is not cloud computing, and it's probably more debatable what cloud is and what cloud isn't. And we'll certainly share some ideas what we think makes cloud computing, or the true cloud computing, unique and different than that which many have been doing for 10 or 20 years. But there really is no #2 in many ways. I mean, I guess it depends whether you think mobile is part of cloud computing or distinct, but I think that combination of mobile computing and cloud computing in the IT world really represent what's going on. And again, I'm not sure there's a viable #2 at this time. Well, one thing I think you always watch when you try to understand trends is where the developers are going. And by developers, that can mean individual developers, the small startup companies. It can mean the developers within an IT organization. But it's pretty clear that the developers have moved en masse to the cloud. Whether they're building pure web-based applications or whether they're building mobile applications that are very much web applications with a front end to them. The vast majority of developers are moving to the cloud. Even all the traditional vendors, there's another stat that says 66% of even all the traditional software vendors, their future products are going to be purely in the cloud. So I think it's pretty much gotten beyond the question of whether this is for real and whether or not the world's really going to move there. AT&T in the US says 40% of the iPhones that they sell go into businesses. And this is really exceptional. How many people out here have had a CEO or board member say, please get this device, where this device is perhaps an iPhone, an iPad, an Android, or some other type of rogue device. Please get this on my network. How many have had that request come from above? Yes, it's very common. That's user-driven computing. And it's when it's that user who's at the top of the pyramid, things tend to happen a little faster. But it's fascinating. Phones are going into the workplace not necessarily because the IT organization is adopting and deciding the new platforms, but because users are demanding it. And it's happening en masse. And it's also, in many ways, a great thing for the company economically, in that they don't actually need to own all these phones anymore. And with proper procedures and security and ability to enforce policies, it's a better experience for all. And that's really, I think, one of the signatures of cloud computing. People are using the device they want to use in the workplace. And by the way, I don't think very many people enjoy carrying two devices around with them, certainly not two phones. There probably is a proliferation of devices with iPads and such, but generally speaking, I think a lot of that has happened because of this big separation that has existed between the corporate world and the sort of personal computing world. Mary Meeker, I don't know if anybody knows Mary Meeker from Morgan Stanley. She does some very famous studies on mobile computing and internet in general. And she presented at our Atmosphere event last spring in the US. And so this data that she presented, which is here, is really from the beginning of this year. It's 6 to 9 months old at this point. And it's fascinating because what she basically said is by 2012, the sales of smartphones in terms of units will surpass that of desktop and notebook PCs combined. I'm very interested to have Mary come out with her latest study because I have to predict this will end up being a way overly conservative estimate. With if you sort of just look what Android has done in the last 6 months and the growth there, which I'll talk about in a bit, I'm going to go out on a limb and say I will bet in 2011 that will happen. Because the explosive growth of mobile smartphones is just astounding. And it is iPhones, of course, and I guess it gets a little difficult to decide whether a tablet is a mobile device or not. So maybe we're getting into a challenging semantic area. But it is incredible the growth that's happened, and we're going to speak to that in a moment. 50% of BlackBerry users would like to have another device. A lot of people love their devices. I love my BlackBerry device. I've always had multiple devices, been one of those types of people. But certainly there's a desire for more, and companies are opening up. I think 2/3 of companies now are supporting other types of platforms as well. Again, very user-driven. And there's a lot of great things to love about BlackBerry and all the products that RIM produces. But there's all of a sudden a diversity of choices out there, and these things are not just email devices anymore. They are really becoming your most personal computer that you have. And it's really beginning to show in the market. This is an astounding statistic to me. For those who have been in technology forever, 2 million iPads sold in the first 2 months. And if you just do basic math on that, that's like something like $1 billion. $1 billion in 2 months. I mean, there's almost nobody in technology can't look at that and say like, wow, I mean, they're just making everybody look bad. $1 billion, usually that's like a decade to get to $1 billion, right? 2 months. And you just have to give all the credit to Apple for doing something really phenomenal. In many ways, I actually think the iPad has done more for cloud computing than anything that came before it. Because who would have ever thought a computer that would be carried around by CIOs everywhere? How many have an iPad with them right now? Look around the room. Astounding. A computer that does not run Microsoft Office. Incredible. But this is really the confluence of the two trends that I like to talk about, which is consumerization of IT. Put simply, give the people what they want in cloud computing. You put those two things together and you have really an amazing change that's happening in the world. And it's very exciting. It's only going to get better. Let me share a bit what we've been doing in the last year and some of the improvements we've made on our cloud offerings, cloud services. We continue to push hard on wanting to move very quickly and innovate very quickly and bring the very best to our users and our customers and our partners. This is not always perfect, by the way, but we really believe that one of the central points of cloud computing is the speed of innovation. The fact that you are always on the latest version. There is no old version. There is no upgrade. And we continue to refine how we do that to make sure it is a non-disruptive process, that it's predictable, you don't suffer regressions or anything else. And we are far from perfect at it yet, but we continue to fine-tune this process because we want to keep the pace of innovation going. We want to stay ahead, and we want to make sure the gap between when consumers get innovation and businesses get innovation continues to shrink. Just by way of example, Gmail was launched in April 2004 to consumers. It became available as a business product in 2007, about 4 years later. Sorry, 3 years later. 3 years later. What you're starting to see now, and I think you'll start to see, is us having things in place where if you choose to, if you are a business or some subset of your users want to be on a much faster train, want to be on the same train that a consumer might be, you can do that. And you can be getting the very, very latest just as it's available. So that's very important to us. We also want to have plenty of controls because we appreciate that that's not for everybody. And we want you to be able to make those choices. So we're starting, as some of you have seen, starting to release some of these capabilities to make decisions by different groups or parts of your company. It is important for us to say we're not going to stand still. Here, the picture you see here is our priority inbox, which basically will help you figure out which emails you should read first. And it's generally a big theme, at Google that the amount of information that hits you every day, every moment is only going to increase. And if anything, the cloud, the technology ought to help you make best use of your time and understand what's important. And not only do it, but do that in a very smart way, a way that continues to learn as you work with it. Just as an assistant who supports you learns your quirks and your interests, so should your applications. And that's what a priority inbox is all about. It's again, not perfect, but I think it's gotten a phenomenal, it has many millions of people using it already. It's only been a few weeks, and we continue to push forward. We also made some changes. One of the biggest complaints about Google Apps has always been, it's a little bit of a separate world. If you sign up for a Google account as a consumer, you have just a vast array of services. And if you are a Google Apps business or a school, you had a very limited subset. They were actually sort of different type of accounts. And we are midway through the process of eradicating that, giving you freedom to have every application, every service at Google, if you choose to. And again, for the parts of your organization where it might make sense. We've already announced the opt-in of this, many thousands of organizations have already opted in for these new style of accounts. It'll be a full rollout next month, and just to give you a lot of simple example, if your art department would like to use Picasa to store and share photos, you should be able to do that. Doesn't mean necessarily you want your whole company to be using Picasa to store photos or not, but you can make decisions like that. If you want to let people use Google Reader or Blogger to do maybe official blogging for your company, you could do that under your domain and under your control. So that's a big change, and again, the beauty of cloud computing is there's no upgrade. There's no install some more RAM, there's no visit to the desktop. You push a button, and you flick a switch, you make a few decisions, and you go. And that's the beauty of this model, is there's never an upgrade. We also appreciate that Google's not going to build every application that you need. And we want to open up our cloud in many, many ways, and you're going to continue to see more ways that Google's fairly vast compute resources are going to be made available to you. We started down in a very modest way with our Google Apps Marketplace, realizing that there are a lot of applications that people are building in the cloud, some of which may run on Google, others run on other great platforms like Amazon AWS, or their own home-built stack, in some cases maybe even Azure, if you can believe it. But they should work well with the applications that you already have. And I think breaking down that divide between applications is a really big step forward for cloud computing. These small silos that work well but are independent of each other is not ultimately a great solution. And so we've worked hard on enabling the capability to, email as much as anything can sit in the middle of this. And so you're seeing some great applications that have gadgets in our email that are integrated with Calendar or use Google Docs. They use single sign-on and user authentication and navigation so that it feels to the user like a single application. And you have a lot of control over what data is shared with these applications. And this is just getting started. It's about 6 months in, but it has a lot of promise. And again, it's really just the start. We really want to open up Google as a compute platform to the world in many, many ways. And we're kind of just getting started at that. Android's been a phenomenal success. I mentioned Mary Meeker's study. When she did that study, I think we had announced there, roughly in that time frame, that there were 60,000 devices being activated every day. There's now more than 200,000 Android devices being activated, new devices every day. And that's just, a handful of months later. So the growth of the platform, and by the way, of course, iPhone is still growing like crazy. RIM is still growing. It's not as if this is really coming at the expense. The industry itself, the smartphone industry, is growing by leaps and bounds. But we're very proud of this, and we're very excited. In our view, what the PC was to the prior generation of technology, or what mobile devices are to the current platform. You think hard about what, you used to get asked, what's your desktop strategy, which there was only really one. There's now a lot of choices out there, and you probably, when you ask what's your strategy, what's your platform, you're probably talking about mobile first. Also, very happy to announce that there are now 3 million businesses that are running Google Apps. We told you last October when we were here that it was 2 million. Well, now it's 3 million. So the adoption rate continues to accelerate for us. And again, we take a lot of care and caution. Obviously, there's an enormous amount of small businesses that sign up every day. We think that's a beautiful thing. It is wonderful to have global companies like Ahold bet on our platform and partner with us, and we do everything in our power to make them successful when they do. But it's a great platform, and another hallmark of cloud computing is whether you were a 2-person business or whether you were a 100,000-person business, it's the same platform. It's a very democratizing principle. It's very exciting, and it's so out of line with the tradition of IT between a small business system and an enterprise system. There are also 30 million active users on our system now. So the adoption rate continues to grow across education, across small business. Mid-market for us, in the kind of hundreds and low thousands of users, is in fairly dramatic acceleration for us now. And of course, we continue to have great adopters in the sort of global 1,000. I'm going to just a few more ideas, and then I'll wrap. I think one interesting thing about the cloud is it's followed a bit of what I think you see elsewhere, in other sort of technology shifts, where people first think about the new technology as just something cheaper, a cheaper way to do X, Y, or Z. When the PC came in, it was because getting time sharing on the mainframe was so difficult, and there's such limited, constrained access to the technology that maybe we could do some of this on a PC in our own department. So maybe we'll sneak one in the back door and have access to it. But little did people know, of course, it would radically change computing in the corporation and even probably more importantly in the home, where it was never even envisioned. And to me, that's what's fundamental. A lot of times people look at cloud computing as a cheap way to get less expensive email, or a way to just have someone else set up the server for you on your behalf. And that is really just the very, very beginnings of cloud computing. In the end, what it really is about things that you could never do before. Things that just, all of a sudden the eyes are open and there's a whole new set of possibilities. In the PC world, it might have been desktop publishing. I'm not sure everybody thought when the first PC went into a business that it would also become a platform for doing high-quality desktop publishing. Things that you would pay crazy amounts of money for a professional to do for you became something almost anybody with a reasonable amount of creativity could do. Cloud computing has much of the same effect. What are the underpinnings of it, of course? You know these things. Massive storage, the cost of storage really moving almost to zero at an incredible pace. Enormous compute capacity. We're very excited. We have the largest compute capacity out there by a significant margin. And the important thing is, that seems sort of a vague concept. It is important to realize that compute capacity is available to you here, right? It's not as if it's this vague notion out there of a Cray system with some fluids bubbling through it. This is compute power that is accessible to every user right here. It's very powerful. Let me show you some of the things it unlocks. So if you think about what's different about the cloud. Mapping, world mapping. A realistic online view of the world that continues to get better every day. And this is really exciting. Mapping's been around for a while, that's for sure, but having a base map that doesn't just get improved every 2 or 3 years, but every user in the world is contributing to it. It's getting better each and every day. Today we have turn-by-turn navigations we have directions available in 129 countries. We continue to launch turn-by-turn navigation on these devices in more countries. So mapping is very fundamental because your businesses ultimately are on the earth. They're in places, and being tied to physical location is what's very special about mobile devices. Real-time translation. This is, again, when I joined Google 6.5 years ago, this was a research project for us. being able to actually translate in real time between languages. And today, it's a feature of Gmail. You can receive an email somebody wrote in French and read it in English, or vice versa, with many, more than 50 language pairs that you can read. It's a feature of Docs. It's also an API, so developers can build real-time translation into their own applications. And this is the power of the cloud. This is a simple query or statement that is harnessing the power of thousands of computers simultaneously. Voice to text, another great breakthrough. 30% of searches done on this mobile device are done via voice, as opposed to by typing. 30%. That's a pretty powerful statement. And particularly if you think about putting these sort of things together, voice to text, real-time translation, very small, very smart mobile devices, the possibilities are fairly endless, and I think we're really just beginning to explore them. I'm going to show you a few examples, just anecdotes quickly before I wrap. I only have a couple of minutes, that I think are very special about cloud computing. I'll share a Google example with you first. Last April, I'm sure you all remember the volcanic activity that caused so much disruption to travel in Europe. Google had several hundred people stranded, either trying to get back to Europe or to get home from Europe. And I recall on a Sunday afternoon, I happened to look at my email, and Marty, our security guy, had basically taken it upon himself to say, hey, Googlers, here's a spreadsheet. If you are either stuck in Europe trying to get home to the US or Asia or vice versa, please add your information here, and we're going to see what we can do to help you. This was about, for me, it was about noon on a Sunday in California. I said, well, that's interesting. I was fortunately at home, so it was a bit of an academic exercise. I looked back 2 hours later, and there were about 270 names in there with complete information. Now, as you might imagine, our security guy, Marty, was probably not going to set up a SharePoint site. I think he might have been challenged to email around an Excel spreadsheet to get 260 people to add their information. Yet very quickly he was able to populate and understand exactly who we had where. And literally organized a couple of charter flights and a few other transports and got hundreds of people home to their destination within a few days. It's a simple idea. There's not a lot of rocket science in adding your information with a spreadsheet, but it kind of shows you the capabilities the cloud brings, real-time response to situations. Vallejo, who's one of our great partners who jumped into cloud computing, I'm sure most of you know Vallejo. One of the earlier adopters for us, have been with us a couple of years, and I should say joined us when the product was significantly less mature than it is today. So we thank them for their patience. But have built a real neat Android application that really shows off the powers of the cloud. All of their corporate information, their people, their offices, and all the information inside their company available through a single Google search application that they've built on Android. You can see it here. A really simple idea, you say, but imagine not having your computer with you, having just a phone, but having access to everything you would have in the workplace. So we'll show you here. You can look up employees, internal sites, communities, information about all the offices. Hervé Dumas is one of our great project leads. If you wanted to find Hervé, you can get information about him. Naturally, you can call him very quickly. You can find out where his office is. It is linked to, of course, our mapping application. So if you want driving directions to go to Hervé's office. Now, maybe this all seems obvious, but it is, in the world of corporate IT, it's actually pretty revolutionary. The idea that all your information on a mobile device as you need it, for a company that is very distributed, where people actually are in the field a lot of the time, that sort of application is very empowering. In fact, just a few weeks after they launched this, 75% of the people who were surveyed at Vallejo said this was not only useful, but essential to getting their job done. This is some applications built by Motorola, who's also a large adopter of Google Apps. They essentially use it to manage all their IT resources and projects. It's a simple set of capabilities built on Google Docs and Google Sites and Google Apps Script, but they essentially replaced $1 million legacy system with something that was very simple and easy. And in fact, the first version was built by somebody over a weekend. And again, that's a very powerful idea. They didn't go into cloud computing thinking they were going to replace the system or even knowing why they might want to do that. They went in probably thinking about cheaper email. But the capabilities are very, very powerful, and I think companies really begin to discover them as they get there. I want to say a couple more things. You know, I had dinner with a couple of our folks out here, CIOs, yesterday, and both of which have only been at their company for a couple of years. And I think it's safe to say that CIOs really of today didn't generally build the systems that they're responsible for now. They inherited them. And they inherited systems that were conceived of in another era. And I like to think of it as the facilities-based era. You know, the idea that people worked in a couple of buildings, maybe a couple of countries, but not generally giant global companies with rare exception, that everything would be protected by a firewall. Everything, all the people, all the devices, all the compute would reside inside a firewall. It was very much a sort of ownership-like mentality. The world changed, and this system began to really break down in many ways. First of all, naturally, it's expensive. A lot of proprietary systems, a lot of energy put in just to maintaining them, to protecting them for security reasons and such. So incredibly expensive. And the cost curve of these systems does not go down. If you're fortunate, it stays flat. And in many cases, it goes up. Inflexible. You know, I think a lot of the security problems companies have these days are due to the inflexibility of these systems, having to poke holes in firewalls and deal with the fact that people are traveling, that people need to work from home, that they have different types of devices they want to use. These facilities-based systems were never designed with that in mind. They were designed in a world where the only computer you used was sitting on your desktop when you arrived at work in the morning. They're brittle. You know, they're very, you know, I think it was the famous Gartner statement that 4 out of $5 spent in IT go into just maintaining. These systems are extraordinarily brittle. Again, we keep layering on more capabilities because of the needs of users, because of the needs of the business, but the systems weren't designed to support them. And they're porous. The other thing that's happened is as we poked holes in firewalls and designed VPN solutions and other ways of helping people to get their work done, they've become very porous. You know, the ultimate statement of a system, a problem you have with your system is the thumb drive. The fact that somebody actually needs to put that thing into one of your computers, load up a bunch of information, put it in their pocket, generally not for any nefarious reasons, just because they need to get their work done, is a real sign of failure, you know, in this era of network computing. So the cloud computing world, in my mind, this is a simple diagram that I think represents it, which is, it doesn't mean you don't have a firewall, it doesn't mean you don't have corporate assets, but they're thought about very differently. It's a very modest set of assets that you protect very carefully, the family jewels, if you will. These are the things that run your operations, run your factories, run your ATMs, your transaction systems. I don't think those will be going into the cloud very soon, and I don't think that's what cloud computing is really about. But it's really about the fabric outside that, how your people interact with information, how your people get their work done. And I think cloud computing is a world that says they don't have to reside inside the firewall. In fact, the firewall is much smaller than it used to be. These devices can be designed to be attached in very defined ways to the information that workers need to get their jobs done. That can be desktops, that can be mobile devices, that can be applications, that can be homegrown applications. But this world is not only more flexible, certainly a lot less expensive. I would say to you today, and it's probably the more controversial statement, it's actually a more secure environment. It's designed for the fact that people are traveling, getting on planes, leaving their laptop in security at the airport or what have you. It's okay. That's what this world is designed for. We're actually making some really great progress with respect to security in the cloud. And we're going to have another announcement in that regard a little bit later today. So security is really paramount to cloud computing, and we certainly appreciate that. It's probably the single area of concern that holds people back. And our job really is to continue to prove and prove again that the cloud is actually a more secure environment. So we're going to have some more to share with you today. Okay, I had a build, sorry. I think I said that. Low cost, add capacity, scales. Okay, and security. The last thing I want to say is about CIOs. Generally, you know, technology in business is all very personal in the end. And, you know, I can remember, it was about 4 years ago, the very first university moved to Google Apps. And I can remember a CIO of another university who was not thinking about it, saying, those who do so will be fired. Those people are going to be fired. It's only a matter of time. And 4 years later, more than 40% of the universities in the United States have moved to Google. And it is so mainstream, I don't think, and as far as I know, I don't think any of them have been fired. So I think the track record is pretty good. There are certainly those who feel like they need to step out and be at the forefront, and there's always a bit of risk when everybody else isn't doing it. I think we're getting beyond that. I think CIOs are beginning to appreciate that this is where careers are made. This is not a crazy thing to do. This is not a crazy cutting-edge thing that's going to put your career at risk. It's actually becoming very fundamental. So we're pleased to see that shift. I think that's happened a lot in the last year, and I would expect it will continue. Last thing, I do have a gift for you today. It's not under your seat. Don't reach under your seat. But we do. As I said, the mobile world's changing very quickly, so we could not leave you with a phone that's anything more than a couple of weeks old. So we have for you today, for all of us here, this is the Samsung Galaxy S, which I think some of our folks actually need to fly to Asia to actually acquire because they're in such demand. These OLED screens are particularly in short availability. So the Galaxy S, we're actually going to get you all in the Wi-Fi. We're going to get you all in a pseudo company that you're going to join with us. So when you go out for lunch today, and no, you can't go get it now, so there's no reason to leave your seat just so that's perfectly clear. When you go out for lunch, you'll receive the Galaxy S. There's some instructions inside of it that will help you get on just on the Wi-Fi itself, and we'll do some fun things with it later. So hope you enjoy this. The beautiful thing about mobile is it's changing so quickly, and we're happy to help you keep up with the latest. So thanks all for being with us. It's going to be a great day, and join in and have some fun. Thank you.